most beautiful among thousands and thousands, Yeshua.
Hello, I'm your host, Reverend Michael Norton, and I'd like to welcome you back to the podcast, The Supernatural Through His Word. We go through the biblical texts verse by verse. Currently, in our project right now, we're still in Genesis. We've gone through Genesis chapter 1 through 10, and we're arriving at Genesis chapter 11 today, the Tower of Babel. Some really cool and interesting stuff here. We have yet another cosmic event that's happening that affects God and the heavenly realm. And we're going to unpack that today and look at some incredible stuff that's going on in the supernatural. This is actually a very exciting chapter in Genesis here because it actually launches some more themes and some more topics that carry on throughout the Bible, through the Old Testament and on into the New Testament into Revelation. So we'll take a look at that here today. So this podcast is through anchor.fm, and it's also filtered out to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and many other podcasts. And if you're a visual person, kind of like I am, I need to see the visual references while I listen to podcasts. I do have the simulcast on YouTube under my channel. This podcast is hosted on m16ministries.blogspot.com. So if you want to go find out what the different podcasts are, go look for this one, Supernatural Through His Word. We're looking at Genesis chapter 11, which is probably our episode 8 now. And we're diving into another very fascinating cosmic event that's kind of brushed over with the Tower of Babel incident. So let's go ahead and launch those PowerPoints, Mac. Let's do kind of a recap from Genesis 10. We were doing Genesis 10 last time in our podcast. It's a genealogy of the sons of Noah, Ham, Shem, Japheth, and the birthing of the post-flood nations we saw there. And we're going to see here in Genesis 11 how it's kind of recapped and give us a bigger understanding of what the genealogy was all about in Genesis chapter 10. Genesis 10 could be the history setup for the dividing of nations at the Tower of Babel event in Genesis 11. Genesis 11 documents another cosmic level event of rebellion. We've seen two events of mankind's rebellion and heavenly rebellion prior to this. We saw in Genesis 1 through 3, we saw the fall of Adam and Eve, primarily in Genesis 3. We saw the sin of the Watchers, where heaven came down to earth and violated earthly women and produced the abominations called the Nephilim and their bastard offspring, unclean spirits. And that was in the sin of the Watchers in Genesis chapter 6. You may want to go back and listen to that one if you don't know what we're talking about here, because that was something interesting. And then we had the flood that cleansed it. And now we're back at the Tower of Babel with the descendants of the flood and what is going on here. And that's what we're going to unpack today. What's going on at the Tower of Babel? Kind of looking back, I always refer back to my Sunday school and how this is presented to us, because a lot of times when it's presented to us in Sunday school, it sticks with us. I remember the Tower of Babel, remember we had our papers out and we were coloring crayons and we're listening to Mrs. Jones put the felt board up of the Tower of Babel, and there's these little people running around there. It was about the Tower of Babel being built, and it's just this giant tower mankind was building. And you're just wondering, what the heck were they building this for? Because it went up and up and up and up. And Sunday school was like, what's this about? Who cares? It's kind of like a lore or mythology, and it just didn't make sense or fit, But here we're going to unpack why and what mankind was doing, and they were being very naughty. So let's start with Genesis 11, verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. Verse 2, and as the people migrated from the east, they found a plain. It's actually called out as a valley in the Hebrew, in the land of Shinar, and settled there. Verse 3, and they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. In verse 4, then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the whole earth. So let's look at verse 4 and unpack it. Then they said, come, let us build, and in Hebrew it was for ourselves, a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. So out of rebellion, we see right now they were supposed to be dispersed, right? We learned back in Genesis 10, was it? And back in Genesis 8 through 10, that when God had the ark rest, he wanted mankind to be dispersed, go forth and multiply, and go out through the earth. But we see here that they stayed and they built a city. And what they did with the city is let us build ourselves a city, and with a tower in its tops to reach the heavens. So now when they're in rebellion to not being dispersed as God asked, they're staying in one spot. And now they're building this behemoth structure that reaches to heavens. So kind of like in Genesis 6, where we had the angelic incursion coming down to earth and mating with earthly women. Now we have in Genesis 11, where mankind's building the ziggurat, what they're called, these towers, to go up and ascend in the heavens, in the opposite direction, earth to heaven. And that's in rebellion to God. He didn't want us to do that. Let's look at 4b, part B of verse 4. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the earth. So out of rebellion to God, let's build a city with a tower that will stretch into heaven and rival God. Lest we be dispersed, right? God told them to disperse, go forth and multiply. So they're in violation again there too. So basically what mankind was saying too in rebellion is we don't want to spread out and inhabit the world like God instructed. We want to stay right here in Babel and stretch the kingdom into the heavens, right? We're going to build up and go upwards and ascend above him. Where did we hear that before? We've heard that in Isaiah. We've heard that in Ezekiel, right? With the reference to the king of Tyre, who was in reference to a divine spiritual being, most likely Satan. With the I am, here they are too. We will ascend above. We will ascend above God in the kingdom of the heavens. So if you've been listening to the podcast, you know from Genesis 10 in our prior podcast, Genesis 10 verses 8 through 11, Nimrod was responsible for building Babel and Nineveh. We call from Genesis 10 verse 8, Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. Verse 9, he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. And in verse 10, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Verse 11, from that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rebahath, Calah. So we see that Nimrod set out, and he was a conqueror, right? He was conquering cities, building empires for himself. He wasn't working for God. So I also mentioned last time about Josephus, and regarding Nimrod and Josephus, the Antiquities of Jews, book 1, chapter 4. So if you didn't hear that from the last podcast, let's just go ahead or if you forgot about it, let's just go ahead and just recap this right now. So in Josephus' book of Antiquities, book 1, chapter 4, about Nimrod. Now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man and a great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as if it was through his means they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured their happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them into a constant dependence of his power. He also said he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again, that he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. Well, good luck with that, Nimrod. So Nimrod was trying to build a tower that was so tall, what they called a ziggurat in ancient times, right? Their own mountain to God. Kind of like the pyramids or ziggurats. It's a mountain. It's supposed to be a holy place where gods reside, and that's what they're building here. And he's going to build it so big that God can't kill him in the flood, right? And he's going to rise above God and take him down. So I don't know. That's pretty ambitious, and it's not very bright. So let's return back to Genesis 11, verse 5. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men had built, and said, Verse 6, and the Lord said, behold, there are one people, and they have all one language, and this is the only beginning of what they will do. And nothing they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Let's look at verse 5. So, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of man, the sons of man, had built. So God, being omnipotent, all-knowing, and all-powerful, took note of this rebellious activity with the sons of man. So he's coming down, he's taking notice of it. It's kind of like, it's the narrative. Many people who read the Bible don't get like, oh, how come God was suddenly took back by this? No, he knew it was going to happen. So now it's saying the Lord came down to see. So he already knows it's going to happen. He let them build it, and now he's coming down going, okay, let's deal with this thing now. They've done what they're going to do. They didn't stop from doing it. They didn't change their ways. He gave them a chance. Now he's going to come down and deal with them directly. Let's look at verse 6a. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, unified. The people of Babel were unified, but were unified outside the will of God, right? They had one language, one will, and here they go. This was their complete rebellion to God. They refused to disperse. They developed their own language, and now they're going to rise above God. Let's look at the second half of verse 6, verse 6b. They have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. So the people are unified outside of God's will. Although such unification is good, the people of Babel are doing it to exalt themselves and not God. They're using it to unify themselves, become God, right? Exalt themselves. We don't need God. We have one language. We're good. Now we're building this huge ziggurat, this huge fake mountain tower that rises above God. Things are good. We don't need God. Stick our thumb in his face. So let's go to Genesis 11, verse 7. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. Verse 8. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Let's look at verse 7. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. Who's the let us? That's back to the divine counsel. God speaking to the divine spiritual beings in his council. Let us go down there and stop this thing. And confuse their language. He's going to disrupt their ungodly unity. So God disrupts their unified communication because, again, their major thing, not just by being contempt against God and think they're going to be above him, but they disobeyed him and didn't follow his instructions to go forth and multiply. They're staying in one place, got one language. So a couple things he has to achieve here. He's going to disrupt their language, and it's going to cause them to disperse and go out and repopulate the earth like they're supposed to do the go forth and multiply. Remember, that's that theme that keeps popping up from Genesis 1 through 11. Go forth and multiply. It happened in Genesis 1 and 2. Go forth and multiply with Adam and Eve. Then we get to the flood. Earth's wiped out. Noah's instructed to have his family go out and multiply. And they do. And that was their instructions here, but instead, most of the civilizations gathered around in one language now, and they built that Tower of Babel thing, and they're going to rise above God. So they're disobeying God in many issues. This is like another fall incident, but it has some cosmic incidences where the divine heavenly council has to come in and intervene. So let's look at verse 8. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. So with their unity and language broken, the people dispersed as God first intended. It forced them to. So the Lord dispersed them, right? This is how he did it. Okay, you need to get along again, start going forth and multiplying. I need you to populate the earth, not hang around here in Babel in the Valley Shinar. We don't need that. We need you to go forth around the world and multiply. Something very subtle happened here in chapter 11, and it really doesn't show up till later, like Deuteronomy 32, to tell us what happened. But there was another cosmic event that happened here in verse 8, and we're looking at it. So what does Deuteronomy 32 make reference to, and what was the cosmic event? Here it is, Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9. Verse 8, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is allotted his heritage. So if you're watching the YouTube video, I have it for my my logo software posted up here, but you really don't need it. We're going to discuss this. So when the Most High, we're looking at the logos with the Hebrew there, gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, when did he divide mankind? He did it at the Tower of Babel event. So we're discussing here, right? He dispersed the people. He divided them right there. He fixed the borders of the people according to the numbers of the sons of God. What does that mean? What's happening here? But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. So there's a division taking place here of the people amongst the sons of God, some members of the divine council. But the Lord's, his portion is his people. He kept some of them. Who did he keep? He kept Jacob his allotted heritage. Okay, there's something big happening here. So God divided the sons of man into regions of rule under the sons of God at the Tower of Babel incident. Did these divine rulers mistreat man under their jurisdiction? We know from Psalm 82:1, verse 1, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of gods, he holds judgment. Who are those? The sons of God, the Elohims on the divine council. Verse 2, how long will you judge unjustly and show partially to the wicked? We see regional rulers. That's what we want to walk away with. What are regional rulers? So here it is again. I have it under the logo software here. God has taken his place in divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. These Elohims, the divine spiritual beings in the council. How long will you, he's talking to his divine council, judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? So the dispersion of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11 identifies a cosmological event that affects both man and the sons of God. At Babel, God divvied up the nations amongst the sons of God, and he kept his portion, Jacob, the allotted heritage. Where have we seen Psalm 82 about the wicked and the judging partially? These same wicked divine spiritual beings are the gods Moses contends with. We see in Exodus that God brought judgment on the gods. Yahweh brought judgment on the gods, right? Who are the gods? The Elohims. So when you're seeing stuff happening in Moses, those might be regional spirits that the Egyptians are worshiping, who were supposed to be managing the people, but instead they had the people of the land worship them as gods. And we see it in the Prince of Persia, right? Daniel's fasting, and Gabriel's trying to come towards him, but he's withheld 21 days while Daniel does his Daniel fast and praying in supposition to pull through the release of the Hebrews who are in captivity. And Gabriel says, I would have came sooner, but we were in contention with this Prince of Persia guy, very powerful, divine spiritual being. And we see this in the book of Daniel. These are where these guys are coming from. That's where they show up from. The Prince of Persia was probably somebody that was given, Persia under this when the people were divided into regions under these spirits from Deuteronomy 32:8 and Genesis 11, the dispersion. The dispersion, they're divvied up under sons of God here. They're divvied up. So that's where this comes from. And that's a walkaway I never really got from, you're sitting in church on Sundays or Sunday school, right? That's what this tower is about. There was a divine cosmological event that man tried to push through heaven with the ziggurat structure, this giant tower that could never be under the waters of the flood if God flooded again. He promised he wouldn't. So again, now we're not trusting God. We're sticking our thumb up at God. We're going to rise above him. We're better than God. We're going to take God down. I mean, these guys were in nasty trouble. And they weren't dispersed to go forth and multiply like they're instructed to do. So God brought it down. And because people didn't want to obey, he sent the Gentiles under the sons of God, the Elohims. Some may have been good. We know some were wicked. We don't know how the whole story plays out, but some were definitely wicked. We know that from Egypt, right? And Exodus. We know that from Daniel. We also know from the stuff happening around us now politically and, these environments and spiritually. Look at what's going on in the United States now. These are wicked, divine, spiritual beings who are causing a lot of garbage over America now, trying to bring it down. And they're going to face judgment. That's what's going on. There's some power play. These are the wicked rulers of Ephesians 6:10. Rulers, authorities, princes, and powers, in the spiritual and heavenly places. That's what's going on. Tie it all together here. So verse 9, therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over all the face of the earth. He dispersed the people, the Gentiles, and they went underneath these spiritual beings, these spiritual rulers from the divine council. And we know from Psalm 82 that some were unjust. Gosh, we've seen that example in the Bible too. And they'll be held accountable for it. So let's look at verse 9 in detail. There God called the name Babel, for there the confused the language of the earth, right? From there, the people spread out on all the face of the earth, in the end, going out among the earth as God had instructed. So God finally got his way, even though man was being disobedient and tried to fight him, hold our breath, throw temper tantrums, elevate ourselves up. God, that's funny. All the stupid things we're capable of, right? So now that ends the Tower of Babel narrative in Genesis 11, but we're not done yet. Now we're diving into Shem's descendants. Why are we doing that? Now that Yahweh has divided the Gentile nations amongst the divine spiritual beings, the council, God will call out his portion through the pagan Avram. Avram, as we will see, is a descendant of Noah's firstborn Shem. Now we're going to return to a genealogy in this narrative. So Shem's descendants are in Genesis 11, starting with verse 10. These are the generations of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he fathered Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he fathered Arpachshad 500 years and had other sons and daughters. Verse 12. When Arpachshad had lived 35 years, he fathered Shelah. And Arpachshad lived after he fathered Shelah 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah lived 30 years, he fathered Aver. Verse 15, and Shelah lived after he fathered Aver 403 years and had other sons and daughters. So something significant is happening in that verse too. So Eber, in our English text, pronounced Aver. Aver is where we get the term Hebrew from. It means to cross over. So we see the beginning of the Hebrew starting to take place here. Who are these? These are God's allotted people. This will be his allotted for Jacob, right? That's what we're seeing here. So this is why we're seeing these genealogies pop up now. We saw them before in Genesis 10, but now they're reassembling like, this is how it makes sense now, and how after we got dispersed, what's going on here. There's a good setup. So verse 16, when Aber had lived 34 years, he fathered Peleg. Verse 17, and Aver lived after he fathered Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters. Remember we learned back in Genesis 10 that Peleg's name meant division. There's some sort of divvying up going on here, right, with Peleg? Okay, keep that in the back of your mind. So the people of the earth are now doing what Yahweh had originally intended for us to do, to go out and populate the earth. Yahweh's portion from Shem are going forth and multiplying. So this is happening now. Verse 18, when Peleg had lived 30 years, he fathered Reu. And Peleg lived after he fathered Reu 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Reu had lived 32 years, he fathered Serug. Verse 21, and Reu lived after he fathered Serug 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug had lived 30 years, he fathered Nahor. Verse 23, and Serug lived after he fathered Nahor 200 years and had other sons and daughters. What are we getting to here? Here we come. Verse 24, when Nahor lived 29 years, he fathered Terah. And verse 25, and Nahor lived after he fathered Terah 119 years and had other sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he fathered Avram, Nahor, and Haran. So we look at Avram here, right? It's Abraham or Abram, but in the Hebrew, the B is actually pronounced the V, depending if that's God Dagashinit or how it's pronounced. So it's Avram, means exalted father. Why is that? We're going to see that here in a second, right? Abraham's going to be the father of nations here. Something interesting here. Take a look at verse 26. When Terah had lived 70 years, he fathered Avram, the father of nations. Again, there's some more possible Hebrew numerology going on here. 70, that means holiness, sanctification, right? And 10 years completeness. So there's a little bit of numerology going on with this here too. Why God mentioned 70 years here, just happened to stand out for them. It just so happens that Terah lived 70 years and he fathered Abram, which is the father of the nations, or father of God's nations, father's portion. He's the father of God's portion going out here, Yahweh's portion. So here are Terah's descendants. Verse 27. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran fathered Lot. Okay, we're starting to see these characters come together here. Verse 28, Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred in Ur of the Chaldeans. So we're looking at a lineage that's in ancient Iraq or Babylon. That's where these guys are at here, in Ur, right? So they weren't supposed to settle there either, right? They made the same mistake. You guys aren't supposed to settle there. God wants them to move on. So verse 29, Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Ishka. Verse 30, now Sarai was barren. She had no child. So let's look at this. This lineage with the wives' names hints towards royalty. When we usually saw the father, the name, the man, the wife, right? When we see the man and the wife called out, there is a lineage with the wives' names, and it's hinting towards a royalty in God's kingdom. Another thing we pointed out too, that they pointed out that Sarai was barren. This is an interesting theme that happens through Genesis. So barren, the women that are preferred in the book of Genesis that God will use in a great way, are typically identified as being barren. We see this with Sarai, and we'll see it with a couple other people who pop up, or other women who pop up in Genesis here. They'd be barren because God's going to demonstrate his miraculous through giving life to the barren womb. We see this quite a bit. God blesses these women by entering their situation and miraculously helping them. He gives them children, right? He gives them heirs to the Father's throne, or however you want to look at it. Genesis 11, verse 31. Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son's Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Oops. Right? They're not dispersing. So verse 32, the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So again, Terah settled Haran when they were supposed to move on to Canaan. They didn't do it. So it's just, man's getting predictable here. Let's move, let's stop. Let's move, let's stop. It's just like they couldn't get to where they're supposed to be going. You probably see it all the way through Exodus too. Come on, guys, move, move, move. So let's look at Genesis 11. Conclusions to draw here. This is a very interesting chapter. Our focus here is the cosmological events that happened. The Tower of Babel. Man disobeyed God in going forth and multiplying like he was supposed to in Genesis 1 and 2, like he was supposed to in Genesis, 8 and 9. And then we get to Genesis 11. Man disobeyed again. Man settled in Shinar and built the city of Babel. Recapping, Babel was most likely led by Nimrod. We see the genealogy of Ham, right? I think we came out of the genealogy of Ham. Nimrod and his citizens shook their fist at God and swore to ascend to his level in the heavens and be like God, build their own mountain of God, their own ziggurat, that will ascend above the floodwaters and ascend above God's mountain himself into the heavens. What did God do? God scattered the citizens of Babel and put the Gentiles under regions of the sons of God. This was a cosmic event. And God took his own portion, the lineage of Jacob. So get this, this is what's happening here in the Tower of Babel event. God scattered the citizens of Babel, and those who were Gentiles were placed under the regions of the sons of God. Some were good rulers, some were wicked rulers, and some were going to face judgment. We know this from Deuteronomy 32. We know this from Psalm 82. And God took his portion, the lineage of Jacob. So where do we see this start happening? Abram and his wife Sarai. They're being called out. He's calling out these pagan people who are in the Shinar, right? And they moved from Shinar out to Haran, and they stopped there, right, in the land of Ur. And they weren't supposed to stop there. They were called out from the land of the Chaldeans, and they just decided to stop at Haran, and that's not what God wanted them to do. But this is God's portion. He is calling out Abram now, and that will be the lineage of God that he owns and he protects, and we'll see this throughout. As Genesis starts to evolve, and it evolves all the way down through the lines of the Gospels and Revelation to take play again. God is trying to rebuild his Edenic environment, and he's calling out his chosen ones. And it's going to be through Father Abraham. What we say Father Abraham, right? Because Avram means father. Father Abram. So in part 2 of Genesis, the Tower of Babel, after Yahweh divides the Gentiles and scatters them under the regions of the sons of God, he calls out his portion from the descendants of Shem. He calls out the pagan Avram from Haran, right? He's calling him now. And that's what we're going to see in Genesis 12 as Abraham receives his calling, Abram Sarai. And again, she was identified as being barren. Why? Because God's going to demonstrate his miracles through her. And we all know without spoiler alerts, that they both screw this up and try to do things on their own means with Hagar. But God still comes through for him because he promised him. And that wraps up Genesis 11. I think there's some really cool stuff here because it's stuff that I never really grasped or put together or heard from the pulpit. I think this stuff's starting to emit now that these doctoral papers are coming out. Some of these doctoral guys who wrote these papers and are already been peer reviewed since the 70s are starting to present this information. It's starting to make it to the pulpit. But we had a very watered down version. Like, what the heck was going on in Tower of Babel? Why were they building this skyscraper? I don't know. There was no rhyme or reason to it, but now you know. Man was trying to ascend above God and is trying to ascend above the floodwaters that ever happened again. They're trying to unify and elevate themselves above God, and that just doesn't play right with God. He doesn't like that. So this wraps up Genesis 11, supernatural through his word. Like I said, I put this out a lot because I work with a lot of ritual abuse survivors, because there's no foundation for them biblically because things have been twisted so badly. So I'm trying to go through and do research and reknit this back for them to give them some sort of foundation. They follow this, they get a good foundation of what's happening biblically, and that God is a loving God. He's here to love us. And we saw here too that when man thought, hey, I'm going to be God, I'm going to destroy God, I'm going to be above him. I was thumbing my nose at him as I build my tower, I go past him. God didn't go out and destroy them. What did God do? He goes, you know what? I actually told you guys to disperse, so I'm going to have to go down and kind of move you along here. And he did. And the ones who didn't want to be under God, he gave them what they wanted. You don't have to be under me. Here, I'll put you under some of my divine spiritual beings. What do you think of them? And they're creating a lesser image with free will, and they're capable of doing evil to people. And that's going to be something topic's going to surface quite often. We saw it in Daniel. We see it in a couple other places. We'll see divine spiritual counsel quite a bit through here. But again, God was a loving God. He didn't destroy the people. He didn't wipe them out because he said he wouldn't do that again. He wasn't going to flood them. And if the Nimrod caught that word, which is like 2 generations back from his dad, his granddad, that God's not going to wipe you out. You don't need to build a tower high above the waters. It's not going to happen again. But they didn't listen, But God, was fine. I'll give you guys what you want. He didn't spank them, but he took his portion. He took his people that are mine, and you guys divine spiritual beings can divvy up the rest. And what we see is Father Abram came from that. That's who God's going to protect. And that's going to be the Evers, right? The Hebrews coming out from that. Amazing stuff. This podcast is hosted on m16ministries.blogspot.com. We hope you liked it. And we know it's very straightforward, low budget, podcast, but I want to get the information out right? We're still working on sound stuff. I'm slowly becoming a sound engineer. You slowly but surely see information in the audios start improving. My voice probably won't ever, but I can make it sound a lot better. I can speak right now. Anyhow, it's been great talking to you guys and bringing forth this information. You have questions, please go put it in m16ministries.blogspot.com commentary under this podcast, Genesis 11, Supernatural Through His Word. I believe it's episode 8. Or you can go over to Facebook and go to M16 Ministries, where I also have this podcast posted, and just put comments in there. Like, I have questions about this or this. What about this? And, either I'll have answers for it. I'll go research it because that's what I love doing. And those who've been following along with the podcast, I'm still knee deep in learning Hebrew. I'm trying to learn vocabulary now. I can read Hebrew, and I can go through it and sound out the letters. I know my vowels now, but yeah, my biggest problem right now is my eyesight. You're trying to look at a Hebrew Tanakh, and I can't find a giant print Tanakh. I need one because all the vowels are little dots and dashes and little squiggly lines underneath the consonants. And if you have like even a large print, it's hard to read. So I've been mainly using my Logos software as I've been reading some of this stuff and translating because I need something to blow it up and amplify it. Oh, that's two dots. That's an A sound, EY, A, like hey. So it's been fun, and I'm slowly getting there. And I don't know, as we mature through this Genesis, probably by the I can reach the middle of Genesis or end of Genesis, I'll be able to read some of this stuff in Hebrew for you guys. Love you guys. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. If you like this, even though we're low budget, we have good information. Go ahead and smash that like button, or and subscribe to us too if you want to keep in contact with what we're doing. We also do spiritual warfare information and podcasts. I provide that under Tales of Glory. And that's over on a field guide to spiritualwarfare.blogspot.com if you're interested. And I also do St. Teresa of Avila under Tales of Glory too. So we do deep prayer topics under there. And we also do spiritual warfare topics on that too, and inner healing, stuff like that. So again, we thank you so much. We're also working with underground churches in nations we can't discuss right now because we want to protect them. But if you're interested in helping us out there, we're trying to help those people out too. Go ahead and go to the m16ministries.blogspot.com, and there's a PayPal button. And go ahead and just help us through generosity. We're not begging for money here, but we can use it, and we'll make sure it gets to the right people if you do help us out here. So until next time, from the M16 bunker, we love you guys. And next time we'll be talking about Father Abraham, or Father Avram, right? I have to use my Hebrew now. the bet without dagash as a V sounds. Avram. All right. God bless you guys. Till then.
Yeshua.